Right now, it's July, and July in Texas is hot, really hot. This next weekend, we'll celebrate Independence Day, and families everywhere will partake of the simple joys of iced tea and lemonade. And like the summer treat that I had this evening, the delights of homemade ice cream. It's one of the perks of being my daughter's father. If there was such a thing as a world champion ice cream maker, I'm pretty sure she'd take the prize. And that's the perfect segue into a really cool story. Everyone has a story. This is episode 20, A Cool Idea. A lot of folks in the South are pretty sure Bluebell is the national ice cream of Texas. We get to enjoy it all year round, but a big old bowl of Bluebell is especially good in the heat of summer. Sad as it is, some people can't get Bluebell ice cream. There are people in the world who don't even know about it. Here in the South, people also like iced tea. I've been places in the world where when you ask for ice in your tea, they still look at you funny. You know what it feels like on a sweltering summer day to sit in the cool shade with a glass of refreshment? Well, if so, you can thank Fred. Like many notable entrepreneurs in history, Fred had a vision that most others considered pure folly. Perhaps he was obsessed, maybe a little out there. But unlike most entrepreneurs, Fred's vision relied entirely on a non-existent market and a product few people of his era cared about or even knew about. Fred came from a privileged family, which meant, among other things, he'd grown up with the benefit of an ice house that was supplied each winter from their frozen pond. This 19th century luxury made it possible to occasionally enjoy treats like chilled drinks and even ice cream year-round, a convenience he and other New Englanders were apt to take for granted. As a young man, Fred journeyed to the Caribbean with his older brother, where he was temporarily deprived of the various refreshments to which he'd grown accustomed. He realized that people living in these tropical climates never used ice, if for no other reason besides the obvious, they didn't have access to it. They never knew what they were missing, like experiencing the simple pleasures of a cold drink, let alone ice cream. Fred had the idea of harvesting ice from his pond back in Boston, then transporting that ice to people living further south. It seems like a simple idea, but at the time it wasn't simple at all. Lacking refrigeration or even electricity, Fred faced a huge challenge, getting ice from frosty Massachusetts to tropical climates without melting his profits along the way. 23-year-old Fred bought his own brig, a two-mast, square-rigged ship for $4,750. That would be over $100,000 today. He filled the hull of the ship with ice that was wrapped in hay to insulate it and set sail on the 1,500-mile voyage south to the island of Martinique. Fred's ice arrived 3 weeks later, but the locals didn't really know what to do with it. They never had ice and didn't understand why they needed any. Consequently, Fred's ice didn't sell quickly enough, and there were no ice houses to store it down there. Without demand, the unanticipated lack of storage facilities reduced most of his ice to worthless puddles, resulting in severe financial losses. His next several tries were even worse disasters. The next year, he made 3 shipments to Havana, also with little success, deepening his losses. But Fred was determined, perhaps among the most determined entrepreneurs in history, ever. He began experimenting with shipping modifications and ways to mitigate the various factors resulting in his failures. At the time, ship owners would rent space on their vessels to make extra money. Fred could negotiate cheap shipping rates on the southbound ships because they were usually empty on their way down to pick up cargo in the West Indies. Even so, the shippers were still reluctant to haul frozen water. Not only was the idea laughable, but if it melted, then it would flood the ship and ruin their provisions. Not deterred, Fred persisted. He discovered that sawdust was a more effective insulator than hay. It was also a waste product of the lumber industry, so that made it free. The ice itself was also free. He just needed to pay for labor to cut and load it. 4 years into this endeavor, Fred eked out his first profit. He didn't see much of it, though. He got swindled by the villainous conduct of an agent. And unfortunately, it was all too little, too late. By that time, people were pursuing Fred to collect the debts his ice follies had amassed. He was repeatedly arrested, landing him in debtor's prison for a while. In a later experiment, Fred tried using his ice to preserve a shipload of fresh tropical fruit coming back from Cuba to New York. But trouble kept following him. The experiment failed, and most of the perishable fruit rotted during the month-long voyage home. This landed Fred further in debt again. Following the War of 1812, he struck a deal with the French to deliver ice once again to the island of Martinique. This time, insulated ice houses would be waiting for the shipment to arrive. Fred's ice not only enabled French colonists to drink cold, refreshing beverages, but it also provided cool, soothing relief for people suffering from tropical illnesses like yellow fever. 10 years into this obsession, Fred began shipping ice to Cuba with ever-increasing efficiency. He borrowed money again to construct double-hulled ice storage depots at strategic ports close to his target markets throughout the Caribbean. Through sheer determination, Fred continued perfecting his shipping methods until he finally was turning a respectable profit. Then, after 2 decades of hand-cutting large blocks of ice the hard way, one of his suppliers harnessed a blade to his horses and came up with an ice plow. This development eliminated one of the constraints of ice harvesting, and it tripled Fred's production. Beyond his logistical victories, there's another aspect of this story that makes it especially intriguing. The linchpin in Fred's grand strategy was creating demand for the ice that he'd been working so hard to bring to the market. Well before Henry Ford or Steve Jobs ever said it, Fred subscribed to the idea that people don't know what they want until you show it to them. According to Fred, a man who has drank his drinks cold at the same expense for 1 week can never be presented with them warm again. Based on this resolute theory, Fred accompanied his ships to ports in the Caribbean and southern United States. There, people were so unfamiliar with having ice that Fred provided printed instructions about how to properly store and utilize the frozen stuff. To create demand, Fred gave out free samples, and, as he predicted, eventually no one ever wanted warm drinks again. Further sweetening the market, Fred showed locals how to churn ice cream using the ice he provided. Like a drug dealer, he got them hooked. Being a true Southerner, the ice cream would have done it for me. I'd be a paying customer for life. In his 3rd decade of selling ice, Fred sent his first ship on a 120-day voyage to Calcutta, India, where the hot climate would make it one of his best markets. He expanded to other distant markets, including Singapore and Brazil. By this time, Fred had his operation running smooth as a frozen pond. Fred became known as the Ice King. He owned both the supply and demand in an almost limitless market. His business was so successful that when he died in 1864 at the age of 80, his net worth would be in the hundreds of millions of dollars by today's standards. Frederick Tudor single-handedly created a market that didn't exist by giving away his only product. With his vision and steadfast determination in the face of repeated failure, he created an entire industry around something as simple, even laughable, as frozen water. And that's his very cool story. Hope you had fun listening to this story. Now go share the details you never knew about Frederick Tudor with your friends and family, especially your kids. Discuss it over dinner or ice cream. I'm Rodney Powell, and you're listening to the Everyone Has a Story podcast, a production of realmedia.us. Add it to your favorites so you'll never miss an episode. Catch you next time. Everyone has a story.